with.
If there's one thing there is no shortage of this summer, it's problems to keep the Prime Minister busy. More strikes, COVID on the rise, airlines expected to cancel thousands more flights this week. Holiday chaos looms. But as the summer woes mount up, Boris Johnson once again finds himself consumed by a scandal in his own party. This time, allegations of sexual misconduct against the man he appointed Deputy Chief Whip. And once again, it raises serious questions about the Prime Minister's judgment. This morning, we'll try to find out what the summer holds for people across the country and for the man running it. With record labour shortages already causing huge problems this summer, the woman whose job it is to fix the job market, Work and Pensions Secretary Thérèse Coffey, will be joining me. Andy Burnham is the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, with Keir Starmer's fate hanging in the balance. Is he considering stepping up? As COVID cases rise sharply again, Dr. Jenny Harries, the woman in charge of protecting you from the virus, will tell you all you need to know. As tensions with Russia continue to grow, I'll be talking to the man who advises the President of the United States on how to deal with the biggest military threats facing the Western world, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States, General Mark Milley. And here to review the papers this morning, the editor of The Sun, Victoria Newton, and the former BBC diplomatic correspondent now at Cambridge University, Bridget, Kendall. But first, the news with Lakshmi Gopal.
Good morning. 6 new claims of inappropriate behaviour by the former Conservative Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher have emerged just days after he was suspended from the party for allegedly groping 2 men. The accusations made to 3 of today's newspapers stretch back more than a decade. Mr Pincher hasn't responded to the BBC over the latest allegations, but denied them to the newspapers. An official investigation into his conduct has been launched. Holidaymakers are being told to expect more flight cancellations over the next few days as airlines struggle to cope with passenger numbers after the pandemic. Flight operators want to make use of a measure which allows them to axe flights from their summer schedule before Friday without being penalised. Meanwhile, the government says that security checks on new airport staff are being prioritised in a bid to ease the recruitment shortfall. The Foreign Office says it's working closely with the Ukrainian government to secure the release of 2 British men, reported by Russian state media to have been charged with being mercenaries. Dylan Healy and Andrew Hill were captured by pro-Moscow separatists in eastern Ukraine in April. The pair now face being tried in a court which isn't recognised by the international community. For the first time in its history, Wimbledon will host a scheduled day of play on the middle Sunday. The British players Cameron Norrie and Heather Watson will make their debuts in the 4th round. The All England club is also marking the centenary of Centre Court by inviting previous winners, as well as refugees from Ukraine, Syria and Afghanistan. That's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 12:05. Back to you, Sophie.
Lakshmi, thank you very much. Well, let's look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers this morning, starting with the Mail on Sunday. The Prime Minister knew all about groping Tory 2 years ago is their headline, and it says number 10 fears another by-election as we reveal Boris joked about Hansie MP before giving him a top government job. The Sunday Mirror, their headline, Boris missed chances to probe Pincher. He was warned twice of concerns, according to the Mirror, about the Deputy Chief Whip. 6 more alleged victims reveal, says the paper. The Sunday Telegraph leading with that too. The Prime Minister turned a blind eye to sex pest warnings is their headline. Fresh allegations emerge as it was revealed that the Whip quit in disgust over Pincher's role. The Sunday Times, this is focusing on Prince Charles. The Prince's honour for tycoon who bailed out his failed eco-village is their main headline. The Observer, Johnson faces official probe on plan for 40 new hospitals. And this is the government's official spending watchdog launching an inquiry into the Prime Minister's claim that 40 new hospitals will be built by 2030 as concerns grow in Whitehall that the pledge is unaffordable and has been oversold to the public. The Sunday Express, Boris told we need tax cuts now. And The Sun on Sunday is about Holly Willoughby, that she's going to pocket £1 million after secretly settling a legal battle with former agents. Not bad. Well, let's review the papers now with Victoria Newton, who is the editor of The Sun, and Bridget Kendall, who is the BBC's former diplomatic correspondent, now at Cambridge University. Good morning to both of you. Victoria, we will, of course, start with Chris Pincher, a story that you, The Sun, broke on Thursday morning. A new correspondent as well, a new political correspondent, first week in the job.
That's right. Young Noah Hoffman, who we just hired that week, broke this great story on Thursday evening. We broke it online at about 8:30 in the evening, and obviously it dominated the agenda for the next couple of days and still is today.
Absolutely. And the coverage this morning, very much about what the Prime Minister did or did not know.
That's right. I mean, it was certainly being briefed that the Prime Minister wasn't aware of the allegations around him in the past, but today's newspapers would suggest otherwise. There's a quote that you think could possibly have only come from Boris's mouth, Pincher by name. And obviously there's got to be an investigation now into how many of these allegations are correct, so we'll have to wait for the outcome of that.
The Mail on Sunday says that this is the fear, is that it could lead to another by-election. We're way off that at the moment, aren't we?
Well, they'll have to wait for the results of this investigation into his conduct. If he's then found guilty of this, then he will have to resign. So that's the danger point for both the Conservatives and possibly Labour. Does Keir Starmer want to risk a by-election and not win it, because they've got such momentum at the moment after the previous wins? So it's a risk for both, really, but the Tories will be desperate to avoid this by-election.
Chris Pincher denies the allegations that are in the papers this morning. Bridget, though, what do you make of the coverage?
Well, this isn't good news for the Prime Minister, is it? It's not just sex allegations, it's coming back to being a political story. I found several people in recent days saying, why do we want to hear about all these sex allegations in Westminster? There's so many other important things in the world. But what we're finding from the papers today, Prime Minister turned blind eye to sex pest warnings, says the Sunday Telegraph, and a full quote from the Mail of that sounds like it came straight out of the Prime Minister's mouth. Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. So there are two things here that one is, did he knew well enough before there were allegations, why did he bring him back as Deputy Chief Whip? And secondly, it feels as though Downing Street hesitated in not just in deciding whether or not to remove the whip from him because of this by-election risk. So this isn't actually anymore just about one MP. It's also again about the Prime Minister and whether his leadership might be weakened by it. So one to watch closely.
And what it does is overshadow what a lot of people are very concerned about, the cost of living. There is, interestingly, in The Sun today, this piece that has been written by Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak about what they are doing now, about how they are going to tackle the cost of living crisis.
That's right. It's interesting that they chose to write this together, both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They're obviously very keen to get on the front foot with the cost of living and say, look, we are listening to you all and we are trying to help. So on Wednesday, you're going to get the threshold risen for the national insurance contributions, which will help a lot of people. The only thing I would point out is that they're giving us back some of the money they've already taken away from us. And will that be enough? No, in terms of the public, I think they understand much more. If there's an income tax cut, they know what that means. It's money back in their own pockets. And that's obviously what a lot of Tory MPs are calling for.
And there's no mention of that, is there? There's no mention of any forthcoming income tax cut. There's no mention of any further fuel duty cut. It's been cut 5p, but there are lots of people calling for it to go higher. There's no mention of a VAT cut either.
That's right. They've been debated all week. There seems to have been disagreements between number 10 and number 11 about what they should do. Should they cut VAT on energy and fuel? I mean, in this article, they do say they hint towards a business tax cut, but there's zero mention of income tax cuts yet.
Let's move on to Ukraine. Bridget, you were Moscow correspondent for a long time. You know the story inside out. Let me just start, first of all, with the story that's running this morning about the explosions in Russia. There's an apartment block that's been hit.
Yes, this is Belgorod, and it's in Russia, but it's very close to the Ukrainian border, so the far west of Russia. Quite a big town. And it seems to be quite serious. Several people reported killed. The number may go up. And the local governor saying that air defences were activated. But I should say this isn't the first time this has happened. There have been explosions in parts of Russia before, some near the border, which might make you think this is the Ukrainians having a pop over the border and managing to do some damage, but also in other parts of Russia. So I think we need to leave an open mind at the moment about what caused this. Most likely, Ukrainians across the border. That could raise up the ante in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Second possibility, internal sabotage by those in Russia who are not happy with what's going on, because there have been some explosions near military recruitment centres. And the third thing, everyone always wonders with this Russian government, is this a false flag? There have been rumours before of Russia, apparent cases of Russia. It would seem extraordinary to do it, but you have to ask, is there a reason why Putin would want to raise the temperature at the moment and actually do something himself? I would say that's the least likely.
The Sunday Times have got a big piece there. It's really looking at what could happen, the end game, and what might happen, and also about possible regime change. Is that possible in Russia?
That's right. I mean, there was a G7 summit of Western leaders this week where Ukraine was the major subject. It's not in the front pages of the papers this morning. We've discussed why. But there is good coverage if you go to the inside pages, and this is particularly good in the Sunday Times. Mark Milley, who's written this article, excellent analyst, and he's saying we've got to answer the painful questions of what the end game would be. How far is the West prepared to go? And you can't just say, oh, it's up to the Ukrainians, because we're supplying them the weapons. And also, if Russia wants to negotiate, it's going to want to negotiate on sanctions, and that's up to the West. But the big question, I think, is about Western resolve and how far you can go. How many weapons will there be for the West? I think Ukrainian resolve, we kind of know they want to carry on. And in fact, there's another very interesting article here. Battlefield inventors knock out Russian drones. Ordinary Ukrainians putting together handmade blockers to block Russian drones to try and stop them hitting the Russians.
Lots of images in the papers this morning, if I can find them under here, but of the airports and these extraordinary queues that we're starting to see already, and halls, luggage halls, here you go, baggage halls full of unclaimed suitcases, luggage that has got lost. It does look like it's going to be, well, we're expecting thousands more flights to be cancelled this week as airlines prepare for the summer. It does look like that it's going to be quite tricky getting away this summer.
It does. There's strikes coming as well. There's the lack of staff at airports to manage the baggage and checking in situations. So yeah, we've been getting lots of angry calls from readers and letters. People worried that their holidays that they've saved up for and they're not going to be able to go on them. And then there was an interesting story in one of the papers today about EasyJet. Their bosses are all jetting off to Mallorca to have a great conference, so lucky for them.
But it's very uncertain. My daughter's flight was cancelled at 3 in the morning and she was leaving at 9 o'clock that morning. I mean, it's so short, the notice that people are being given, and people will lose a lot of money, won't they?
That's right. It couldn't happen at a worse time, really, for the industry as it was trying to get back on its feet.
We've got the boss of Ryanair saying the age of cheap air travel is over, so that's another thing too. High oil and gas prices now, partly due to the war in Ukraine. So it does make you think, people going to book in holidays to come to go abroad? Are they going to, is staycation going to be here to stay with strikes and the high cost of tickets likely to come?
Let's talk about Wimbledon now, and also the Women's Euros. Wimbledon is there's a sort of great moment for some of the lesser known Brits who've sort of been shining in the last few days, and you've got that there. We've got Norrie. He's there today, isn't he? And Katie Bolter, who sadly didn't go through yesterday.
There have been some great matches and great playing so far. I mean, it's very exciting to have had so many Brits at this stage in the competition. We're still focusing on Heather Watson and Norrie, hoping they'll go through. But quite apart from that, there's also been some other stunning games. So yeah, I found it really riveting to watch this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad that Murray was knocked out and Emma Raducanu we had great hopes for, but it's still been really exciting.
And then there's the Women's Euros coming up.
So the Women's Euros
yeah,
this week, I mean, our England Lionesses are amongst the favourites, and could they do what the boys couldn't do and actually go on and win in a final, hopefully not in penalties. But yeah, we should cheer them all on next week.
It's on the front page of the Sunday Times because they're trailing to this, which is the Style magazine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, does it matter that it's a fashion shoot for the Lionesses, or is this a good thing?
I think that's fine. I mean, we featured them in the Sun on Saturday, all about their footballing prowess, and actually we cover them in our back pages too. But I think, hang on a minute, the boys all get to go on the cover of GQ magazine, posing in various outfits and get sponsorship deals out of it. Why can't the girls do the same?
The key, though, is that they're not always relegated to the Style magazine and the back pages. Yeah. When they win, I'm sure they'll have some victories. let's hope we see them on the front pages of the papers too,
I can
and that
guarantee
lots
you
of
will.
people watch
There you go.
watch the game. I mean, it seems to me, I was thinking about Wimbledon. I'm old enough to remember when people focused a lot on the men's game, and I think I'm not the only one who often enjoy the women's game more. It's somehow more inventive, less about brawn. And I just wonder if the era of women's football is about to go mainstream and centre stage, and we'll all start watching more, hopefully.
Okay.
Well, if the ticket sales are anything to go by, they've been selling out 75,000-seater stadiums in this country. So, and it's now going to be on primetime BBC. So, I think the country will really get behind
We're
them.
going to get women's football on the front of the Sun next week.
Absolutely.
Week after, who knows? There you go. There's a commitment. Victoria, thank you very much, and Bridget, thank you too. Let's have a look at the weather now with Matt Taylor. Have you got some sunshine for us, Matt?
I have, of course, Sophie, if you can say it, I'll get there. But we do have still a few showers around this morning and into the afternoon, but much fewer than we had through yesterday, so more will stay dry. Showers mainly across parts of western UK, also Yorkshire at the moment, so they're drifting their way southwards and eastwards. So into the afternoon, the shower focus will be across eastern Scotland, eastern England, a few heavy ones mixed in. Western areas turning brighter, but big gaps between the showers, which means quite a few of you will avoid them altogether, and even if you do, it'll only be a small portion of your day. Also brightening up in northern Scotland, where we've had the cloud today so far and the outbreaks of rain. A bit cool here in the breeze, warm enough in the sunshine elsewhere, but that breeze continues to bring batches of showers in tonight across Scotland, the other one Northern Ireland, northwest England. Elsewhere, any daytime showers fade away, and a dry start to Monday for the vast majority. Temperatures like recent mornings 10 to 13 degrees. And then tomorrow, there is this zone of cloud which could bring an isolated shower through England and Wales during the morning, but that clears away. Good sunny spells for the vast majority on Monday. A few showers, Scotland, Northern Ireland, but most will stay dry. Temperatures around 14 to 23, so starting to lift up a little bit. As for the rest of the week, this area of high pressure is going to try and nudge in off the Atlantic. Problem is, it will bring more cloud around it, certainly into the northern half of the country, with some rain at times and a bit of a breeze. That shows up in the forecast for Edinburgh and Belfast, but the further south and east you are, Cardiff and London there, showing sunny spells and feeling warmer. Sophie.
Matt, thank you very much. Now, 3 of the top Wimbledon players have it. The singer, Alison Moyet's got it. My 80-year-old mother has it too. How many people do you know who suddenly have caught COVID again? Numbers have jumped sharply. There's very little testing going on, but the latest ONS survey estimates that more than 2 million people have the virus, and hospital admissions are rising as well. Dr. Jenny Harries is the Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency, the body in charge of protecting us all from COVID, and she joins me now. Good morning, lovely to see you. Everyone does seem to have COVID at the moment. Does it matter that a lot of people are getting infected?
It certainly matters to those individuals, obviously. Many of them will feel unwell, and I send out my commiserations to them. But of course it matters on a national basis, because whilst we have an armament now of vaccines and antiviral treatments, we do have, as you've just highlighted, a rise in hospital admissions and occupancy. And that means it's not just COVID that we're concerned about, but it's actually our ability to treat other illnesses as well.
How high do you think it could go now? We've got 2.3 million people, according to the ONS, who have the virus. That's 1 in 30 people. It's jumped a lot, hasn't it, in the last couple of weeks, a third in just the last week alone. According to the figures that you're looking at, how high do you think it could go, and when could it peak?
So the numbers that you're referring to come from the Office for National Statistics survey, which UKHSA commissions, and we work very closely with them and monitor that data. It is retrospective, so it's looking backwards slightly, but nevertheless it gives us a good understanding of what's going forward. What we're seeing mostly at the moment is a rise in the Omicron variants BA4 and 5, and particularly we're looking at BA5, which seems to have a growth advantage. So the majority of cases in the UK now are BA4-5, and it is BA5 which is really pushing and driving this current wave. It doesn't look as though that wave has finished yet, so we would anticipate that hospital cases will rise. And it's possible, quite likely, that they will actually peak over the previous BA2 wave. But I think the overall impact, we won't know. It's easy to say in retrospect. It's not so easy to model forward, although, of course, we do try and do that on a regular basis. I mean, I think the advice is still the same. We want people to take sensible precautionary advice. So, routine things like washing your hands, keeping your distance, wearing a face covering if you're going into enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces. But we're still encouraging people to go about their normal lives, but in that precautionary way. Certainly, if you are symptomatic or you feel unwell, you think it might be COVID, or if you're meeting with vulnerable individuals, then please do try and stay at home.
Do you wear a face mask in public?
So I haven't been routinely wearing one, but I do routinely carry one in my handbag wherever I go. And the 3 times when I wear it, and actually I have worn it in the last week for the very reason that I'm doing exactly what I've said. I'm adapting to the changing prevalence of infection. If I was symptomatic and had to go out, I would definitely wear one. Clearly, I would avoid doing that at all costs. In fact, if I got any respiratory infection, it's a good thing to do. And I think it's a new lesson for the country. If somebody asks me to wear one, sometimes I'll see people who are actually quite anxious. I would wear one. And then obviously if I'm in an environment, so for example, I sometimes travel by tube. If you're in an enclosed, very enclosed, crowded space, then I would wear one then.
If we're heading towards a peak now, and a bigger peak, you say, than the last one, what are you thinking about autumn when this tends to get worse again, and on top of that you've got seasonal flu?
So I think what we're seeing now, and I'm sure your viewers will be watching just the same as we do, you can see these peaks coming and going, and on each new variant we need to monitor what the growth of that variant is, what the characteristics are, and very particularly whether there is any escape from our vaccines and our treatments. And if it has any particular characteristics that are driving that growth transmission. So I think for this particular wave, I think we have some evidence that there may be some slight reduction in effectiveness of vaccines and variants, but they're still maintaining the majority of people, keeping them safe from severe disease and out of hospital. When we then come to the autumn, we've seen, for example, a flu rise in Australia quite sharply. It's the same, it's a good match with the current vaccine. So again, we've got a preventative treatment there, but we're likely to see these waves coming in peaks and not necessarily synchronized. So I think actually, although we all go inside in the winter, in the autumn, and we increase our risk of transmission, we've got to be really mindful that some of these peaks may come at slightly strange times. So the Australian flu peak is earlier. It may well be that we see a flu peak in the autumn, and we could see a separate new COVID wave as well.
Are we going to get lots more people being vaccinated? There's already talk of boosters for the over 65s. Is that going to be extended right through at least to the over 50s and further?
So JCVI obviously provides that advice, and they've given initial advice in May, and GPs, I think, have received that initial activation, if you like, now for a autumn booster for the elderly, so 65 plus, those adults in care homes and vulnerable adults. But the ones that I think I'd really just like to reach out to is we still know that nearly 20% of the 75 plus year old group have not come forward for their spring booster. So if you're in that age group and you haven't had a vaccine booster in the last 6 months, then do come forward. Anybody who's not had a vaccine can still go and get their vaccine. You can go onto the NHS website and book one there.
What about monkeypox? How worried about that are you? It's another viral disease. We've got more cases here than any other country in the world.
So we were the first country to find it. We have been very actively surveying it. So I think it's likely, I think WHO said there's been a threefold increase in global cases reported in the last 2 weeks. And what you will tend to see is increased case ascertainment. So people are going looking for the virus, which is what happened in the UK to start with. As soon as we had that cluster of the first 4 cases, we actively went looking for it. What we have now, though, is, as you say, a picture of different transmission of monkeypox virus than we've ever seen previously. Previously, we've had a few cases with travellers, the first actually not until 2018 in the UK. And we're now seeing transmission going through. So I think we've got about 1,250, I think 1,259 cases in our last report. And we expect to see that continuing forward. We have been offering post-exposure vaccination to contacts of those cases to try and limit the spread of transmission. Clearly, we're now going to move that strategy, which will have had some effect, but in order to try and really clamp down on this infection forward. So we will be offering pre-exposure vaccination to those higher risk individuals.
Jenny Harries, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Now, Britain and its allies are facing a 1937 moment over the war in Ukraine. That is the assessment of the new head of the British Army, Sir Patrick Sanders. This week, I spoke to the top-ranking officer for our most powerful ally, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. He's Joe Biden's top advisor on military threats facing the US. So I asked him if he could see parallels between what's going on now and the failure to confront the growing threat from Nazi Germany in the run-up to the Second World War.
Well, Sophie, thanks. And first of all, I want to thank not only him, but the entire British military for their great support and contribution to what's going on. And as you know, this is a NATO effort. And most recently, I was in London for the Queen's Jubilee and had an opportunity to speak with Tony Ratican, my counterpart. So we're working very closely with the British military. As to the comment of a 37 moment, I'm a closet student of history. I personally think that between 1914 and 1945, that some really horrific things happened, and that was World War I and World War II, and the smaller wars in between. 150 million people died in those wars. And then at the end of World War II, we put in a set of rules that we today call the rules-based international order. Those rules were violated in a very, very gross and illegal manner by the Russians when they invaded Ukraine on 24 February. And really, that goes back to 2014 in Crimea, but they grossly violated on 24 February when they crossed the border and invaded Ukraine. Now, whether that's a 1937 moment or not, I don't know. History will tell. But I can tell you that it's our job to make sure that NATO stands tall, NATO stands firm, which it is. It's stronger today than it's ever been, as you just saw in the ministerials. It's our job to make sure that Ukraine has the means to defend itself so that at the end of the day, Ukraine is still a free and sovereign, independent country with the territory intact.
Do you think it could lead to another world war, though?
Well, we don't want that, obviously. The United States certainly doesn't. NATO certainly doesn't. You know, I'm not going to discount anything, but I don't think that we're on that road. I don't think we're on that path. I think that we're on the path of helping Ukraine defend itself. There's no reason at all why this war has to expand beyond the boundaries of Ukraine that it is right now. That would be Russia's choice. But as you heard President Biden, you heard the other senior leaders and senior political leaders of all of NATO, that the United States and NATO will defend every inch of NATO territory. So we want to contain the war inside Ukraine, and we want to make sure that Ukraine has the means to defend itself.
If we are in a 1937 moment, should we not be doing more now to stop President Putin rather than standing by and letting Ukraine do all the fighting?
Well, the Ukrainians don't want, and nor are they asking for British soldiers, American soldiers, German, French, or any other country to fight their fight. Ukraine has the will, they have the capability, they have the people to fight this fight. What they need are the means. What they need are the weapons, the artillery, the tanks, the personnel carriers, the ammunition. That's what they need. They're not asking for others to fight their fight for them. They're just asking for help, the means, and that's what we're trying to do for them.
When you look at the situation now, the attacks which have been intensifying, is Russia now winning the war in Ukraine?
Operationally, the Russian military's performance has been well reported on, and they have not succeeded at most of their operational objectives. Tactically, what's going on right now is a grinding war of attrition in a relatively small portion on the eastern portion of Ukraine called the Donbass. You're looking at the Luhansk Oblast and the Donetsk Oblast, a relatively small portion of Ukraine where there's very intense fighting going on, and really you see a war of attrition, a grinding war, and the Russians are making a little bit of progress, measured in yards and kilometers per day, 1,000 meters here and 1,000 meters there. Ukrainians are fighting a very effective, active area defense with lots of small tactical counterattacks. So this is a grinding war at great cost to Russia. So I would not categorize this in any way, operationally, tactically, or most importantly, strategically, as a success for Russia. I can tell you that the Russians have suffered significant military losses here, losses in personnel, losses in equipment, and they would have to reconstitute a significant amount of their military if they were to try to continue the attack to all of Ukraine, to include the capital.
The Russians have just abandoned Snake Island, this strategic outcrop in the Black Sea. Do you think they really did give that back to the Ukrainians as a gesture of goodwill?
I know the Ukrainians were inflicting significant losses on the Russians on Snake Island with strikes, artillery strikes primarily, and the Russians decided to withdraw. I don't know if that was supposed to be a signal, a message of goodwill, or they were compelled to withdraw because of Ukrainian military action. I think it was the latter, but I think it's probably a little bit early to tell.
Can I ask you about spending? NATO countries and spending on defence. Britain claims that it is spending 2.3% of its GDP on defence. Is that enough, or do all NATO countries need to spend more?
Well, I think what we've seen since 24 February is a commitment to do just that, spend more. So most of your NATO countries now have committed to increase their defense spending to the minimum of 2% GDP or more. In the case of Britain, 2.3. I think that's great. I think it's very important. I think there's no substitute for having hard power to defend liberty and freedom against aggressors. And I think having a strong military, a big military, a military that's ready and capable, I think that's important for all countries to do. And from what I have seen to date, the NATO countries, the various NATO countries have made the commitment to do that not only this year, but in the years to come.
Britain's also cutting its troop numbers. Do all armies need more troops, or can we rely now on technology?
Well, I think what you really want to do is look at capability. So there's two terms that are often used, capacity and capability. Capacity refers to size and numbers, and I think size does matter. I think it's important to have sufficient size and capacity, the numbers of planes, the numbers of tanks, the numbers of troops. I think that's important. But what you really want to do is look at capability. And capability consists of technology, it consists of leadership, it consists of how training and how well trained the troops are on their skill sets. So it's a combination of all of that that delivers combat capability or combat power to a battlefield. And I think it's for us as professional soldiers, that's what we look at. We look at the capability of a military, not just its numbers, which are important, not just its technology, which is important, but it's the combination of both of those, plus leaders, plus training, plus their doctrine and their way of war. All of that in combination creates capability on a battlefield, and that's what we look at.
What advice do you give to the Ukrainians about waging this war?
In terms of military advice, I will keep that private between myself and General Zaluzny. You can rest assured that we exchange candid views with each other, and we do that at echelon. So there's a lot of exchanging of professional views. Some of it is in the form of advice, I suppose, but it's an exchange of candid professional views. And we do that on a military-to-military basis, and I would prefer to keep that advice private between us as professionals.
Do you think China could invade Taiwan?
Could, should, would, those are key words there. In terms of capability, I think China clearly is developing a capability. President Xi has mentioned that in public forums. He's mentioned it in speeches that he has challenged the PLA to develop the capability to attack Taiwan at some point in time. And whether they would or not, though, is a political choice, a policy choice, and that'll be based off of how the Chinese view the cost, risk, benefit at the time. And I would tell you that we watch that very, very closely. As you know, China is very much a growing not only economic power and political power in the world, but they are very much a growing military power in the world. And we, the United States, pay very, very close attention to what China is doing.
Do you see any signs, any indications that they might?
There's no indications and warnings of anything imminent at this time, but again, we watch it very, very closely.
General Mark Milley, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks, I appreciate the opportunity.
Now, it looks like we have a summer of strikes ahead. British Airways ground staff will announce the dates that they will walk out shortly. It's expected to hit peak holiday season. Royal Mail managers, train drivers, teachers, there could be plenty of disruption to come, but the cost of living is rising fast. Wages are not keeping up. Should workers get more money to help them make ends meet? It's causing problems for people all over the country trying to go about their day-to-day lives. It's also a massive political headache for the Labour Party. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, joins me now. Good morning. Inflation.
Good morning.
Inflation at 9%. It could rise to 11%, as we know. Workers all over the country worried about the cost of living. What do you actually think is a fair pay rise for people to be asking for?
Well, when we're in a cost of living crisis, and we are, we're surveying our residents and we're finding that a third of people in Greater Manchester are very worried about their finances. Reports from our food bank say they're already seeing more and more people through the door than ever. So this is already very serious. And there are two things yet to come, I'm afraid. There's an energy bill rise in October, which we know about, but also the Food and Drink Federation said yesterday that the spike in food prices is not fully with us yet. It's going to come towards the end of the year following what's been going on in Ukraine. So this is a very serious situation. And in a cost of living crisis, you've got to protect everybody from the effects of inflation. So the government would say they've done that for pensioners. But I would say this right back to them today. Stop demonising workers who are fighting to protect their incomes and protect themselves and their families from a cost of living crisis. Get around the table with them and come up with a fair solution. Everybody's got to be protected from this. Help disabled people who are going to face real pressures later this year, people on benefits. Sick pay for all workers, because we're seeing COVID rise again. That is something that they could do. Lower the cost of public transport for everybody, as we are doing in Greater Manchester. I'm bringing in a £2 cap on adult bus fares from the 1st of September. There is so much more the government could be doing to sort this out.
But you haven't answered my question. Should people be asking for a pay rise? And what is a fair pay rise? What level should they be looking at? Below inflation, inflation, above inflation, in order to help them cope?
No, I think I did answer your question, Sophie. I said it's absolutely right that workers should be protecting their incomes in a cost of living crisis. And that has got to be worked out with the government. Instead, they are relishing the prospect of strikes. They are trying to play the politics around this, when instead they should be getting around the table, profession by profession, and sorting out a fair arrangement to take people through this year and obviously recognise the pay pressures that they're facing going forward. That is what they should be doing. So that is to be worked out, isn't it? Because each individual profession is different, but we need a government that's interested in sorting things rather than playing politics, governing rather than campaigning for their own survival, which I'm afraid is what we're seeing from this government.
So just to be clear, do you support workers going out on strike to get pay rises so that they can cope with the cost of living?
Nobody in my position should ever, in my view, criticise people for trying to protect their incomes in a cost of living crisis. That is absolutely what they should be able to do. And of course, they would say, the unions say themselves, nobody wants to see strikes. But when you're faced with a government that is sitting on its hands and doing nothing, then strikes become inevitable. And I'm putting to you, we don't want to see that. It requires people getting around the table and sorting this out. You know, it just cannot be right to see inflation getting up towards 10%. And then, on the other hand, saying to workers, well, you can't do anything, you're not entitled to protect your income. I mean, that is just simply wrong. We need a completely different approach from the government.
Just to be clear, do you support the rail workers going out on strike? Do you support the BA ground staff who are threatening to go out on strike in the next couple of weeks?
I support the rail workers, I support the BA staff, in that they have got to do what they need to do to protect their income. So I've given you a very clear answer about that. And I think Westminster more broadly needs to wake up to the scale of the cost of living crisis. 2.5 weeks till Westminster breaks for the summer. I don't think the country has a plan in place yet to take people safely through the autumn and through the winter period. What I said before, that rise in energy bills and a further rise in food prices means that people this winter will be going cold in their homes and they won't be eating enough. It's actually not just a cost of living crisis, it's a health crisis as well, it's a mental health crisis. It requires much more decisive action from the government right now.
You're being very clear on strikes and what you say, you don't want to criticise working people. Why can't the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, be as clear as you're being?
I mean, it's obvious that the government are playing this for all it's worth in terms of the politics. You know, all these campaign graphics that they were throwing out about Labour strikes.
I'm asking about the leader of the Labour Party. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I am asking you about Keir Starmer.
And I'm coming to my answer. That is because they're facing a government that's playing politics, and they really shouldn't be doing that at all. All I can do is speak for myself, Sophie. So we had, obviously, the same issues here. Our tram drivers were asking for an increase. What did we do? We sat around the table with them and we sorted it out in a proper way. Why don't we have a government that does that, but instead wants to just constantly put a trap down for the opposition? That isn't good government in a cost of living crisis, as far as I'm concerned. And Westminster shouldn't be doing all of this point scoring because actually this is getting very serious for people.
But what people are also confused about is why the Labour Party, the party that effectively was set up to support working people, why it is not coming out straightforwardly in support of striking workers.
Well, those decisions are for the leader and the shadow cabinet. It's not for me to say how they should go about things. I think they have offered support. Certainly the deputy leader offered support. What I think they should do is support the principle. Working people have got to have the right to protect themselves in a situation like the one we're in now. But beyond that, the details are to be worked out, and that's why, as I say, they are then right to say that everyone should get into negotiation. Instead, we're facing a government, as I said, that's not governing, it's campaigning. It's campaigning for its own survival. We have a Prime Minister that has presided over a total collapse in standards in British politics, and this is a dangerous place for us to find ourselves. I personally feel the cost of living crisis is as serious from a health point of view, potentially, as the pandemic, in that people are seriously at risk later this year. They should be getting a plan in place now. They should be convening COBRA. They should be getting ready for what is ahead of the country, what's facing the country as we go through the rest of this year. Instead, we see Westminster focusing on Westminster things, and I'm afraid it's simply not good enough.
Keir Starmer says going on a picket line does not show leadership. Would you go on a picket line?
I have done in Greater Manchester, where there were bus workers being victimised with relation to what people call fire and rehire. I mean, that is simply wrong. We're taking the decision here in Greater Manchester to put buses back under public control after 36 years of deregulation. And as a result of that, we're linking that process to our good employment charter, i.e. outlawing fire and rehire. You've got to judge these situations, haven't you, as to what extent there is a principle at stake. And where there's a principle at stake, I just would say to you that I have no problem in showing that support.
So Keir Starmer is wrong about that. It's not a question of not showing leadership by supporting people like that.
No, I'm not saying that, Sophie. I'm not saying that at all, actually. The leader of the Labour Party is in a different position from me. I'm not saying I'm in the same position. There is a balance to be struck always, isn't there, between obviously supporting workers but also helping the public go about their business. What I am saying to you today is that the Conservatives are more interested in laying a trap for the Labour leader rather than sorting the issue out. So I personally think that the focus has to be on the government. You know, the Labour Party has shown support for workers in the current situation. People will have different views about picket lines and all of those issues, but I think they have done a good job in standing up for workers. They were the ones that got the windfall tax put in place. So, no, my criticism isn't towards the leader of the Labour Party or to his shadow cabinet or to the parliamentary.
Let me just ask you one more.
Let me just ask you. Is squarely at the Prime Minister and the government, who are not sorting these issues out and playing politics in a cost of living crisis.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're running out of time, but I do need to ask you, obviously, about Keir Starmer's future. We don't know what that future is yet and what Durham police are going to decide. But if he has to resign, are you going to replace him? Would you like to replace him?
Well, there are two things to say about that. Firstly, I can't, because the rules don't allow it. I'm not a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. But secondly, there isn't a vacancy, and I don't expect there to be one. And the only reason I'm coming on this programme this morning is to support the leader, to support the Labour Party in taking the fight to the government. I think there is a possibility now of change. This country, I think, needs a change of direction, and that has to happen at the next general election. I'm serving a full second term in Greater Manchester, but what I'm doing is trying to support Keir and the Labour Party to get that change in government that the country desperately needs.
Andy Burnham, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
You're
now,
welcome.
The papers are full of yet more allegations about Chris Pincher, the Tory MP and Deputy Chief Whip, who had to resign last week over claims that he groped two men. He was appointed by the Prime Minister. Just what did Boris Johnson know about these allegations and when? The Work and Pension Secretary, Thérèse Coffey, joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Did the Prime Minister know that there were allegations of sexual misconduct against Chris Pincher when he appointed him as Deputy Chief Whip?
To the best of my understanding, the Prime Minister has not been aware of specific allegations against Chris Pincher. As people will know, Chris underwent an investigation back in 2017. After a formal allegation was made, he was investigated, and Theresa May reappointed him, in fact promoted him to the role of Deputy Chief Whip at that time. But since then, Chris has continued to serve in government. And what's important, I think, about what's happened the last week, that specific allegations were made and very proactive decision was made to remove the whip, as well as Chris had already resigned from government.
You say, to the best of your knowledge, he didn't know about that. Who have you asked? Who have you spoken to?
Well, my understanding is no specific allegations were have been made. These have now been made, and as I say, decisive action has been taken.
But I'm just wondering where you have got this information from. I mean, to the best of your knowledge, have you spoken to the Prime Minister?
I have not spoken to the Prime Minister, no. He was been returned from International Week, G7, NATO, Commonwealth. I think he returned on Friday, but that's my understanding.
So how can you be sure that he didn't know about the allegations?
Well, I'm saying that I've been informed this morning he did not know about specific allegations. As has been well reported, people spoke to him on Friday, and in agreement with the Chief Whip, the whip was removed from Chris Pincher, who, by the way, is now under a formal investigation process, and it's important that process is allowed to happen.
So I'm still not clear. Who has told you that the Prime Minister, and who has told you with certainty the Prime Minister didn't know about the allegations?
Somebody from the Number 10 Press Office.
So the Number 10 Press Office says categorically that he didn't know about them?
Well, as I say, I've been, as usual, one gets briefed on a wide variety of topics when you come on to a show like this today, and that's what I've been informed. But more generally, I think when people go through, get appointed as ministers, there is an element of vetting that happens. I'm not, again, aware, otherwise, that any specific things were raised at that time.
But, you come on to programmes like this on a Sunday morning, you know that you're going to be asked about things like this. I just want to know what allegations you checked on and how sure you are that what you've been told is correct.
Well, I can only give you to the best of my knowledge. I'm not part of kind of like the rumour mill within Westminster. I'm conscious, and it's in the public domain, of what happened in 2017 when Chris Pincher resigned then, underwent an investigation. The allegation was not held up, and was reappointed, indeed promoted by Theresa May back into the government. So I don't have anything more I can share directly.
But you must have, I mean, you've seen the coverage in the papers this morning, I'm sure, and we've got a Tory MP who's told the BBC they personally raised concerns about Chris Pincher's behaviour to senior figures in Number 10, to the Conservative Party, including to the Chief Whip and to one of the Prime Minister's top advisers before he was appointed. Is it really credible that the Prime Minister did not know that there were allegations surrounding him when he appointed him?
Well, all I've been aware of is that specific allegations were not raised, or the Prime Minister was not aware. There have been allegations made in the past. That's as we went through a due process back in 2017. Indeed, Chris was reappointed, let's say, by the then Prime Minister, Theresa May, in fact promoted at the time. So it's important that there is a formal allegation process within Parliament. It's important that people go to that to raise these issues so they can be thoroughly investigated by an independent body. But of course, people can go to the police at any time. And I proactively encourage people, if they think criminal activity is being undertaken, they should go to the police.
Do you think, given, you read what's in the papers this morning, allegations that Chris Pincher has denied, to be fair, and what I've just told you, what a Tory MP has told the BBC, do you think the Prime Minister should have known?
Well, I think, as has been said, Chris Pincher, I think, has denied allegations. Say he's already been investigated once before, less than 5 years ago, and then he was cleared. So I think what matters within Parliament is that we have a process where there is an independent process people can go to with concerns. But as I say, I've always encouraged people, if things are of a serious nature, that they go to the police. And indeed, the Prime Minister spoke directly, is my understanding, on Friday to people who saw the incident and took decisive action then with the Chief Whip to remove the whip that day.
There are different versions in the papers this morning. The Mail on Sunday, which has a quote, it said, Boris Johnson said to his aides in 2020, he's handsy, that's a problem, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. Did you ask about that specific quote? It's on the front pages of the papers today.
No, I didn't. I've been at another news studio before coming here today.
What does it say about the Prime Minister if he did know that there were allegations against Chris Pincher and appointed him anyway?
I think, as I've just outlined, allegations have been made about Chris Pincher before, which were not held up, and the previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, had reappointed him. Ever since then, Chris has been in government in a variety of roles. Everybody goes through some kind of vetting process, and of course the decision is ultimately the Prime Minister's. But I'm not aware that anything has been raised to prevent his appointment.
There was the serious allegations, of course. Was it right that he kept the whip for a whole day after those allegations first surfaced?
Well, I think the Prime Minister returned to the UK on Friday. I'm conscious that Chris had already resigned the whip. Of course, he's also put out that he's gone to seek some professional support, and he's standing right now. Without jumping to conclusions, I think it's right that the process is followed formally. That's in the hands of the ICGS within Parliament. You need to let that run its course. But when serious specific allegations were then passed to the Prime Minister, that's when decisive action was taken. And it's important that firm approaches are taken in situations like this, but it is also important that process is followed.
But it's interesting because Neil Parish, who was MP for Tiverton and Honiton, he was Tory backbencher, not a minister. He admitted to watching pornography in Parliament. He had the whip suspended straight away. People are wondering why it took so long for a minister who was accused of groping two men to have the whip suspended.
Well, my understanding is it took some time for the formal complaints to be raised in a separate meeting. I think the conduct shown by Neil was both unpleasant and unprofessional, and it was Neil who chose to resign from Parliament entirely.
Downing Street put out the statement, didn't they, saying that Chris Pincher wouldn't lose the whip because he's a loyal Conservative who has shown regret. When you saw that statement, what did you think about it? Showing regret, is that good enough?
Sophie, I've not read that before. I haven't read every single bit of all the newspaper coverage in the last few days. At the same time, I'm very conscious about all the activity of government that we're trying to get on with, and dare I say it, your previous interviewer spouted quite a lot of nonsense, because we are actually getting on helping people tackle the cost of living. We've just literally passed an Act of Parliament. We'll be making payments this month to support people, particularly on low incomes, as well as the change in the national insurance threshold coming through. So we are getting on trying to help people, as well as more general elements of, in particular, things like situations in airports for this summer.
And people are struggling with the cost of living. Inflation is rising. It's at 9%. It's set to go to 11%. What do you think a fair pay rise is for people?
Well, I think it's for employers to work that through with their employees. I don't know, particularly in the private sector, what sorts of productivity changes they may make. The government knows that this is a challenging time for people. This spike in inflation leading to a hike in bills is largely driven by aftershocks of COVID, so the global supply chains are still not flowing. But undoubtedly, the decision we've made to tackle Putin and his invasion of Ukraine also has consequences, particularly on energy costs. That's why we've put together this package over 2 years of £37 billion. We'll be delivering £400 to help every household with the cost of energy this autumn. In the short term, though, we're putting into the pockets of people on our lowest incomes, £326 this month. There'll be more throughout the year. So overall, some of our lowest income families will be receiving an extra £1,250 over the next year.
But there are a lot of people who want a pay rise, who are calling for a pay rise, people threatening to go out on strike for a pay rise. They already have gone out on strike for a pay rise. It's very hard to get a ballpark figure from anyone. What is reasonable? Is it, as I was saying to Andy Burnham, below inflation? Is it at inflation? Is it above inflation? Because this looks like it's going to last for a long time and people need to be able to pay their bills.
I think that's fair. The challenger, it's obviously the Bank of England that is supposed to be managing the rate of inflation. Of course, these are extraordinary times, and that's we'll continue to work with that and try and plug some of those gaps, but we can't tend to cover everything. In terms of pay rises, the Chancellor set out very clearly that we, certainly for civil servants, we'd be looking at a maximum of 3% pay rise. We're conscious that's difficult for people, but indeed other Secretaries of State will be receiving advice from their advisory boards on what to do for specific groups of people who are paid for by the state but not directly civil servants. But it is important that we try and get through this challenge. Of course, the challenge is to get growth going again, and it's by growing the economy that we'll be able to support people and get through this cost of living challenge. For what it's worth, I really wish people decided that strikes were not the right approach to get the outcomes that they want. But again, it's not for me to step in between private employers and their employees.
You oversee the state pension. Is it fair that the state pension is going to rise in line with inflation? Public sector pay won't?
Well, we are going back to our policy of the triple lock. We suspended it for 1 year because of kind of freakish statistics would have given pensioners a particularly odd earnings relation in terms of rises. I formally have to make a decision in the autumn, so I can't predict that. But do recognise that the average income of pensioners is very low, and so potentially a 10% rise, or matching inflation, whatever the appropriate rate would be at the time, if that's higher than earnings, or 2.5%, would be, I think, a measured approach, recognising that their opportunity for people to earn more income is very limited, if possible at all. So the difference in scale between working families and pensioner income is significant. But that's why also, since the beginning of February, we've managed to get more than 500,000 people back into work who were on benefits, out of work, and it's that sort of activity I'm leading in my department, working with employers. That's the best way to get people with a bigger pay packet every month.
But one of the problems we do have, and it sounds strange to say it is a problem, but it is causing a lot of problems, are job vacancies. 1.3 million job vacancies. There are fewer people in work now than there were before the pandemic, around 600,000 fewer. And it is causing a lot of problems for employers, people who can't find people to work in restaurants, on farms, airports, as we have seen. What are you going to do about filling those jobs?
Well, Sophie, there are actually more people on payroll than prior to the pandemic. What seems to have happened is the number of self-employed people has fallen. I think that may be due to people looking for certainty of income by being an employee. So we are continuing to do a number of things. Say 500,000 in just the last 5 months have now got jobs. And of those vacancies, we estimate about less than half of those are at a skill level or salary level where we can help people get into those. But take Gatwick Airport, we are having monthly jobs fair with them. At the same time, Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, had already been making some changes so people could start training. And now we've prioritised making sure things like the counter-terrorism check is done within 10 days. So we're doing what we can with our different levers of government in order to accelerate the opportunity for people to get into those jobs, and we'll keep working that through.
Has Brexit made the shortage of workers better or worse?
I don't believe that's the case. I mean, we've had a significant spike of job vacancies coming through. But to give you an example, in London, there are about 75,000 digital jobs available right now. But a lot of those at the very high end of people seeking that. In fact, the government is seeking people like Java programmers and the like. And what we need to do is to work, which we are working with the sector, to try and accelerate the training and digital skills provisions that we can do in order to get people into that sort of career.
Listen to the EasyJet boss, though, Michael O'Leary. He says there's a real tightness in the labour market, which is absolutely a direct result of Brexit. They cannot get enough people in to fill the jobs like jobs at airports.
Well, Ryanair will have its own ways of how it handles its staff. As I say, in terms of the airports, we're putting on job fairs. We've done what we can to accelerate the security checks that are needed in order to make sure that people have confidence in the safety of what is happening in airports. But we will continue to strive in every way to work with others in order to fill as many jobs as possible, which, as I say, is good for employment, it's good for growth, but best of all, it's best for the worker who has more money in their pocket.
Thérèse Coffey, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. And that is all from me this week. I'll see you again next Sunday at 9. Goodbye.